We are on to part 6 of The Hobbit, Chapter 2, Roast Mutton. Let's continue. They all sat glum and wet and muttering, while Owen and Glowin were trying to light the fire and quarreling about it. Bilbo was sadly reflecting that adventures were not all pony rides and May sunshine, when Balin, who was always their lookout man, said, "There's a light over there." There was a hill some way off with trees on it, pretty thick in parts. Out of the dark mass of the trees they could now see a light shining. A reddish, comfortable-looking light. It might have been from a fire or torches twinkling. When they had looked at it for some while, they fell to arguing. Some said no, and some said yes. Some said they should go and see. Anything was better than little supper and less breakfast, wet clothes all the night. And others said, "These parts are none too well known, and are too near the mountains. Travelers seldom come this way now. The old maps are no use. Things have changed for the worse, and the road is unguarded. They have seldom even heard of the king around here, and even less inquisitive you are as you go along, the less trouble you are likely to find." Some said, "After all, there are 14 of us." Others said, "Where's Gandalf got up to?" This remark was repeated by everybody. Then the rain began to pour down worse than ever, and Owen and Glowin began to fight. That settled it. "After all, we have got a burglar with us," they said, and so they made off, leading their ponies, with all due and proper caution, in the direction of the light. Then they came up the hill and were soon in the wood. Up in the hill they went, but there was no proper path to be seen, such as it might be leading to a house or a farm. And do what they could, they made a deal of rustling and crackling and creaking, and a good deal of grumbling and dratting, as they went through the trees in the pitch dark. Suddenly, the red light shone out very bright through the tree trunks not far ahead. "Now it's the burglar's turn," they said, meaning Bilbo. "You must go out and find out about the light, and what it's for, and if it's all perfectly safe and canny," said Thorin to the Hobbit. "Now scuttle off, and come back quick as all is well. If not, come back if you can. And if you can't, hoot twice like a barn owl, and once like a screech owl, and we'll do what we can." Off Bilbo had to go, before he could explain that he could not hoot once like any kind of owl, even more than he could fly like a bat. But at any rate, hobbits can move quietly in the woods, absolutely quiet. They take a pride in it, and Bilbo had sniffed more than once at what he called all this dwarvish racket. As they went along, though I don't suppose you or I would have noticed anything on a windy night, not if the whole cavalcade had passed 2 feet off. As for Bilbo, walking primarily towards the red light, I don't suppose even a weasel would have stirred a whisker at it. So, naturally, he got right up to the fire, for fire it was, without disturbing anyone. And this is what he saw. 3 very large persons sitting at a very large fire of beech logs. They were toasting mutton on long spits of wood and licking off the gravy with their fingers. There was a fine, toothsome smell. Also, there was a barrel of good drink at hand, and they were drinking out of jugs. But they were trolls. Obviously trolls. Even Bilbo, in spite of his sheltered life, could see that, from the great heavy faces of them, and their size and the shape of their legs, not to mention their language, which was not drawing-room fashion at all. At all. "Mutton yesterday and mutton today, and blimey if it don't look like mutton again tomorrow," says one of the trolls. "Never a bleaking bit of man's flesh we had for long enough," said the second. What the hell old William was a-thinking of bringing us into these parts beats me, and with drink running short what's more, he said, jogging the elbow of William as he was taking a pull at the jug. William choked. "Shut your mouth," he said as soon as he could. "You can't expect folks to come and get ate by you and Bert forever. You've ate half a village between yous since we came down from the mountains. How much more do you want? And time's been up the way where you would have said, 'Thank you, Bill, for the nice bit of Fat Valley mutton like what this is.'" He took off a big bite of the sheep's leg he was roasting and wiped his lip on his sleeve. Yes, I'm afraid trolls do behave like that, even the ones with only one head. After hearing all of this, Bilbo ought to have done something at once. Either he should have gone back quietly and warned his friend that there were 3 fair-sized trolls at hand in a nasty mood, quite likely to try roasted dwarf, then try a bit of burglary. A really first-class, legendary burglar would have at this point picked all 3 trolls' pockets. It was nearly always worthwhile if you could manage it. Pinched the very mutton off their spits, purloined the beer, and walked without them noticing. Other, more practical but less professional pride would have perhaps stuck a dagger into each of them before they observed it. Then the night could have been spent cheerily. Bilbo knew it. He had read a good many things that he had never seen or done. He was very much alarmed as well as disgusted. He wished himself 100 miles away, and yet somehow he could not go straight back to Thorin and company empty-handed. So he stood and hesitated in the shadows. Of the various burglarious proceedings he had heard of, picking the troll's pockets seemed least difficult. So he crept behind a tree just behind William. Bert and Tom went off to the barrel. William was having another drink. Then Bilbo plucked up the courage and put his little hand in William's enormous pocket. There was a purse in it, as big as a bag to Bilbo. "Ha!" he thought as he warming to his new work and lifted it out carefully. "This is a beginning." It was. Trolls' purses are the mischief, and this one was no exception. "Hey, who are you?" it squeaked as it left the pocket, and William turned around at once and grabbed Bilbo by the neck before he could duck behind the tree. "Blimey, Bert, look what I've caught," said William. "What is it?" said the others, coming up. "Lummy if I knows. What are ya?" Bilbo Baggins, a hobbit," said poor Bilbo, shaking all over and wondering how to make owl noises before they throttled him. "A hobbit," said the bit startled. Trolls are slow on the uptake and mighty suspicious about anything new to them. "What's a hobbit got to do with my pocket anyways?" said William. "And can you cook him?" said Tom. "You can try," said Bert, picking up a skewer. "It wouldn't make more than a mouthful," said William, who had already had a fine supper. "Not when he was skinned and bone." "Perhaps there's more about like him, and we might make a pie," said Bert. "Here, you, are there any more of your sort sneaking in the woods, you nasty little rabbit?" he said, looking at the hobbit's furry feet, and picked him up by the toes and shook him. "Yes, lots," said Bilbo. Then he remembered not to give his friends away. No, not at all, not one," he said immediately afterwards. "What do you mean?" said Bert, holding him the right way up, his hair, by the hair this time. "What I said," said Bilbo, grasping, "and please don't cook me, kind sirs. I cook better than I cook. I'm a good cook myself, and I cook better than I cook, if you see what I mean. I'll cook beautifully for you, a perfectly beautiful breakfast for you, if only you don't have me for supper." "Poor little blighter," said William. He had already had as much supper as he can hold, and he had also had a lot of beer. Poor little blighter, let him go. Not till he says what he means by lots and none at all, said Bert. I don't want to have me throat cut in me sleep. Hold his toes to the fire till he talks. Oh, I won't have it, said William. I caught him anyways. You're a fat fool, William, said Bert, as I've said before this evening. And you're a lout, and I won't take that from you, Bill Huggins, said Bert, and put his fist in William's eye. There was a gorgeous row. Bilbo had just enough wit left when Bert dropped him on the ground to scramble out of the way of their feet before they were fighting like dogs and calling one another all sorts of perfectly true and applicable names in very loud voices. Soon they were locked in one another's arms and rolling nearly into the fire, kicking and thumping, while Tom whacked them both with a branch to bring them to their senses. And that, of course, only made them madder than ever. That would have been the time for Bilbo to have left, but his poor little feet had been squashed in Bert's big paw, and he had no breath left in his body. And his head was going round, and there he lay for a while panting, just outside the circle of firelight. Right in the middle of the fire came Balin. The dwarves had heard the noise from a distance, and after waiting for some time for Bilbo to come back, or a hoot like an owl, they started off one by one to creep after the light as quietly as they could. No sooner did Tom see Balin come into the light than he gave an awful howl. Trolls simply detest dwarves uncooked. Bert and Bill stopped fighting immediately, and sack Tom, quick, they said. Before Balin, who was wondering what was all the commotion, Bilbo knew what was happening. A sack went over his head, and down he went. There's more to come yet, said Tom, or I'm mighty mistook. Lots and none at all, said he. No burra hobbits, but lots of these here dwarves. That's about the shape of it. I reckon you're right, said Bert, and we'd best get out of the light. And so they did. With sacks in their hands they used for carrying off mutton and other plunder, they waited in the shadows as each dwarf came up and looked at the fire. And the spilled jugs and gnawed mutton in surprise, and pop! A nasty, smelly sack went over his head, and he was down. Soon Dwalin lay Balin and Feely and Keely together, and Dory and Nori and Owen all in a heap, and Owen and Glowin and Biffer and Bofer and Bomber piled uncomfortably near the fire. That'll teach 'em, said Tom, and Biffer and Bofer had given them a lot of trouble, and fought like mad, as dwarves will do when cornered. Thorin came last, as he is not one to be caught unawares. He came expecting mischief, and he didn't see his friend's legs sticking out of the sacks to tell him things were not all well. He stood outside the shadows a way off and said, What's all the trouble? Who's been knocking my people about? It's trolls, said Bilbo from behind the tree. They had forgotten all about him. They're hiding in the bushes with sacks, said he. Oh, are they? Said Thorin, and he jumped forward to the fire before they could leap on him, and he caught up a big branch with fire on one end, and Bert got that end in his eye before he could step aside. That put him out of the battle for a bit. Bilbo did his best. He caught hold of Tom's legs as well as he could. It was as thick as a young tree trunk. But he was sent spinning into the top of some bushes, while Tom kicked up sparks into Thorin's face. Tom got the branch in the teeth for that, and lost one of his front ones. It made him howl, I can tell you. But just at that moment, William came up behind and popped a sack right over Thorin's head and down to his toes. And now the fight had ended. A nice pickle they were all in now, all nearly tied up in sacks, with 3 angry trolls. Excuse me. 3 angry trolls, and 2 with burns and bashes to remember, sitting by them, arguing about whether they should roast them slowly, or mince them fine and boil them, or just sit on them one by one and squash them into jelly, and Bilbo up in the bush with his clothes and skin torn, not daring to move or fear they should hear him. And if you want to hear what happens next, tune in for part 7, where we see what happens to the dwarves. Thank you for watching Role Play Riot.